Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to a webinar on SBIR Phase III funding agreements hosted by the Outpost, which is a boutique advisory firm and technology accelerator that functions at the intersection of technology, national security, and capital, whether that's federal or venture. My name is Gary White. I am a senior strategic acquisition advisor here at the Outpost. And in my previous life, I did a bunch of stuff in the civil world at GSA and beyond as a retired Air Force officer. So, with that, let's dive right in. So let's level set a little bit. So what is the SBIR program for those of you who don't know? So the SBIR program is was developed and is managed and run by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And before anything else, it is a small business program. The two main goals of the program are to increase economic development activity at a national scale through small businesses, and then also to advance innovative technologies and solutions to federal needs. So it's getting those small businesses access to federal dollars, federal problems, and then trying to see if there is a fit for their solutions. And if there is, helping them to scale those solutions so that they can go and commercialize them in the private sector as well and grow as a company, but also help the country with its basic needs and grow solutions for those. So, with that, as a small business program, it also taps into other small business programs. So the SBIR program also favors doing business with socially and economically disadvantaged persons and companies. So if you think about those involved in the 8A program or those that are women-owned, veteran-owned, service-disabled veteran-owned, and so on and so forth, again, this is a small business program, and so they look to integrate those in as well because that in turn helps meet agency and federal goals for small business contracting. Again, also, this is a way to bring those small firms, all of them, into the federal government space, primarily in the research and development area, to help develop new technologies, to help advance technologies that the companies have already created, and get those into the hands of, like if it's on the DoD side, operators in the field for mission use cases, and then if it's not on the DoD side and the other civilian side of the federal government, to solve all sorts of issues related to energy, for example, infrastructure, things of that nature. The SBIR program you might hear, some people, by the way, might refer to it as SBIR. We get used to calling it SBIR. There is another piece to it called STTR, always also referred to as SITR, and it is very similar in nature at the phase one and phase two level. In fact, there is no phase three for SITR. It all defaults to SBIR at that point. But when it is at the SITR level, it's essentially the same with more of a focus on technology transfer out of a university. So there is a university component to it. In fact, that's one of the required partners with a business in order to receive a SITR contract or SITR grant, which is the most common form of agreement type. And those are often situations where a university has IP and then they do sort of a startup studio style spin off a company, or they license the technology out from the university. Those would be more typical SITR scenarios. But primarily here we're talking about SBIR today, and specifically SBIR 3. So what is a SBIR 3? Well, let's first touch on 1 and 2. So it's the last in a three-phase process. Again, for small businesses. At the phase one level, that's sort of your white paper stage, right? It's like the government is looking for, an idea or a concept in a very particular area. A lot of times this occurs at the basic research level. And those are very short-lived contracts, oftentimes, 3 to 6 months, very low dollar value in the hundreds of thousands or less. And then at the phase two level, that's more your prototype stage. So, your concept has now advanced to a product or service offering. You've created your MVP. The government is looking to procure that, put it into, testing of some kind, or try it out in the field. whatever that situation that actually may be, and then decide whether or not to take it a step further, which would be phase three, and that's the commercialization phase of that MVP, that prototype, right? The scaling of it and getting it out there for dual purpose use, to meet the government need, but also help you as a business scale it so that you can get more commercial sales. Um, Phase one and phase two projects are funded by SBIR funds, you'll often hear. We'll get into that in a second, but essentially, those are very different than phase three funds. Phase three funds can come in any form, but phase threes cannot utilize phase one and phase two funding, right? And we'll get into that in a second here in the next slide of why that is. So, what are the benefits to a phase three? There are a lot of benefits, but they all roll up and start with data rights. So, with any SBIR award, but we're talking about phase threes here today, you get 20 years of SBIR data rights that are akin to restricted rights. So, you have full control over your IP. The government is allowed to use that within the context of your current contract that's active with them, SBIR contract, but beyond that, the government has no claim to your technology, your license, anything like that. Okay, it's a non-exclusive contract with the government for whatever it is that you've developed and you're selling to them. Uh, if the government would like to use it in some other capacity or in an activity outside of the period of performance of your contract, they have to ask you permission, and you can always say no. One solution to that is to have a follow-on contract issued so that they can utilize it and you can make money off of it. But you do maintain those rights for 20 years, and every time that you're issued a follow-on contract, that 20-year time frame resets, which is great. So essentially, you've created sort of a false market wedge for yourself within at least the federal space, but it does carry over a little bit into commercial. We'll talk about here in a sec too. Um, but what these data rights also provide you are the second and third benefits you'll see on the screen there, which are availability for a mandatory sole source award. And the policy directive, the SBIR policy directive, for those of you who've never even heard of that, I highly recommend Googling it and reading through it, if you're a small business, having your attorneys read through it, everybody to understand what the SBIR program entails and how that is tied back to law. The policy directive carries the weight of law. And within the policy directive, it's mentioned several times that the government must award a phase three contract to the greatest extent practicable to the organization, the company that was previously awarded phase one and phase two work, as long as there's a bona fide need that exists. Now, bona fide need means that there is federal funding, right? There is an appropriation that has been set aside for this particular type of technology or activity, and there is an actual current year requirement for that, and therefore the government can obligate those funds for an activity onto a phase three contract. If that bona fide need doesn't exist, all of this is a wash, right? You can't be issued a contract with no funding. That would be an Anti-Deficiency Act violation, potentially. So, again, there has to be that bona fide need. There have to be funds available to get things rolling. But if there are funds available and there is a bona fide need, you do have a right to a phase three contract. And if an agency chooses not to award a phase three contract to a company, this is a relatively new thing. They have to justify that in writing. Why not to the SBA? And the SBA can overrule that decision. So, that you do have some skin in the game in terms of, being denied a phase three if a bona fide need actually exists. So that is something that you want to get smart on. So again, read that policy directive. Those are your top three benefits of the phase three program. Uh, Another benefit is non-dilutive capital, right? So if you think about the funding coming from the government, especially around research and development, which is primarily what this relates to, you're receiving money to do further research, to experiment with different use cases for your technology, product, service, whatever it may be, and expand that, and everything that goes with that activity-wise within the company, and then pivoting and everything. You're getting paid to do that, right? So essentially, it is non-dilutive capital that's coming in for your working needs. But if let's say the phase three is for production or scaling, or let's say it's just a straight up sale, right? You've already commercialized, you have a license now, the government just wants to buy, a bunch of your licenses, have you on contract for 5+ years, whatever it may be. Um, it's not really non-dilutive capital anymore, is it? It's just sales. But that's okay. I mean, that's a good thing too from an investment perspective, right? It de-risks you to a certain degree to your investors and your shareholders. It further builds your place in the market. It adds a little validity to what it is that you're offering out there, that there is a need. It also enables you to, again, test out this government marketplace and see if this is the place for you and expand upon that and grow in that particular vertical. So, there are benefits outside of the non-dilutive capital that you will often hear, because again, that typically, applies to research and development. Limitless scope is another one. So essentially, a phase three can be for anything. It could be for research and development. It could be for not really O&M, operations and maintenance type activities, but if you already have a license, like I mentioned, the procurement of that license and then the maintenance of that license and providing sustainment support for that, whether that's like help desk support or troubleshooting, that's all within scope as long as it, excuse me, derives from, extends, or completes work that was previously conducted under a phase one and or phase two contract or agreement type of any sort for SBIR. There's also no limit on subcontracting percentage at the phase three level, and there's no size standard. So this means that, at phase three, you no longer even need to be a small business, and you could subcontract out a bunch of activities on your contract for the new within scope work that has been added on to advance you past phase one and or phase two. So, some scenarios that I've seen, a small company will, in the process of a phase three, because of the nature of the work and how much they have on contract, they will grow just from that and they will surpass small business status, right? And they'll become a medium sized or large sized business. And that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's one of the goals of the SBIR program, in particular, phase three at that point, is to get you to grow and be successful and bring this thing to market, further than it already is. Another scenario is maybe you want to subcontract under a large vendor. That can be done too. Phase threes can be issued as subcontracts under larger contracts, even competitive contracts. If there are federal government people on the line listening today, there's a great approach to take with your acquisition planning, which is to look to see what potentially you think the gaps will be based on your market research of technology capability out there, right? And so maybe you think there are 4 or 5 different prime vendors that are going to propose against your solicitation, but you think there might be some technology gaps out there, or maybe you want to see some innovation involved in the solutions that come in. You can write in your acquisition plan that a certain percentage have to go to SBIR awardees or small businesses in general, and then that goes into the solicitation, and then vendors who propose, those large vendors, will be incentivized to go out and find SBIR companies or other small businesses to partner with. And partnering can include subcontracting, teaming arrangements, things of that nature, and get to you that way and still carry all the rights and responsibilities that come with SBIR phase three contracting. Um, and then I would say another scenario to think about in that regard is a lot of times small business or large businesses will look to buy up SBIR data rights from small businesses. And so there's two main approaches to that, right? You can be acquired as a small business, and along with your acquisition, goes your data rights and your previous SBIR awarded contracts. So now that large company has those data rights and they can apply, even though they weren't the prime, holder of those contracts, they now own them and all the data rights that go with them. So they have access to that mandatory sole source, set aside award, everything. So that's one path to think about. Another is, licensing out or, just selling off the SBIR previous award itself, which is essentially selling off the data rights, right? So you can do that, and I've seen that several times where a large company will buy up just the contract from a smaller company and pay a certain sum, and then maybe even provide them a certain percentage of the subcontracting that comes of that, from a phase three award, since again there's no limit on that. And then the final large benefit is that SBIRs are farless, technically. And there is case law to back that up. So, again, the policy directive carries the weight of law. The policy directive ties back to US Code 15. And, in that path, although there is a small section of the FAR that does mention a little bit about a portion of the SBIR program, there is no mention of SBIR in the FAR, really, and there is no official tie back to it. Most contracting shops will integrate in some FAR clauses for the government's own protection around certain things. But ultimately, what this means is there's flexibility in contracting here. And this provides more opportunity for those small businesses, more opportunity for the government to get them on contract. It allows for creativity in contracting, arranging these agreements in several different ways when you don't have those mandatory handcuffs of the FAR, rather the ability to use them as they make sense. So that is another great benefit to the program. Okay, so those data rights, what are advantages of them? So again, full ownership and control of your intellectual property, right? That's always the primary concern too, and that includes patent rights. So if you read through the policy directive, it does touch on patent rights, and while you do have protection under patent laws, you also have an added protection through this SBIR 3 data right agreement. And so that's something that's very attractive as well. Control over commercialization, again, because you've created sort of this like market wedge within the federal space, and you can say to competitors, hey, back off, you can't touch this, we have a SBIR contract, we've got full rights and responsibilities around this. You can control how you commercialize in this third phase, right? Like, what's your approach here? You can tailor that, and without much threat from the outside is the theory behind it. Um, Protection of proprietary information. The government cannot share any information related to your SBIR contract out there. FOIA requests would be heavily redacted, and you have a say throughout that entire process. Your feedback will be utilized. Limited government rights. Talked about that already, but again, the biggest benefit I see, I've always seen is outside of your contract. Right, let's say the contract ends, your rights still continue. The government does not have now exclusive rights to that until the end of that 20 years, right? And so, every time you get a contract, that 20 years resets. Technically, in 20, or I mean, in theory, 20 years from now, that technology is probably going to be obsolete anyway, right? But that's a long time to carry that. It's a long time that the government or anybody has to come back to you as a company and say, "Pretty please, can we use this?" And you can say, "Sure, that'll just take another contract," right? And then no other information can be shared outside of that. You can't find that in some other contracts. All right, and then additional potential for additional revenue, right? Again, from selling, licensing the technology with those protections behind it, and all of that, whether it's within the federal government or the commercial space, right? So even if it's out commercially to help you expand, outside the government market, you having all of these protections, also helps out because the government is funneling all its time, effort, research, and money towards your technology and not others now that you have these data rights around it. So that gives you an additional advantage in the commercial market. Okay, so what are some pathways? There's really, if you break it down, there's two main pathways to contracting a phase three. One is with your local contracting or acquisition shop. Okay, and those are found in any one of the 11 participating agencies within the SBIR program. All right, and all of those agencies have a mandated, roughly 3.5% set aside for SBIR 1 and 2 funding agreements, contracts. Uh, there is no set aside for phase threes, of course, which is because they don't utilize those phase one, phase two funds. And because of that, there is a relatively low turnover to phase three within Department of Defense, which has the primary amount of the budget going towards this whole activity, and it hovers around 16%. That's the main reason. There is another reason, and to be honest, part of it is that not all companies are meant to go to phase three, and that's fine. Some companies heavily focus on basic research and applied research up to a tech readiness level of about 6. And they don't really focus beyond that because they're research institutes or companies that heavily focus in that realm, and they're pumping out phase one, phase twos, and doing a lot of good work for the government. but they are not really looking to get into commercialization and tech transfer. And perhaps those are the types of companies that are more into the licensing out to another company that will take it to that stage. Other areas of government have different percentage rates of transition. So I take that with a grain of salt. There are a lot of factors that go into that, but another thing to consider there too is finding that funding. Right, there is not a mandatory set aside for phase three funding, so you kind of have to go out and do a little bit more BD work to find that funding, find a sponsor, and get that on contract than you would at a phase one, phase two level. Now, those shops tend to average 6 to 18 months from requirements and funding identified, in alignment with your particular technology or service to award of the contract. All right. And of course, there's a BD lead time to that as well to factor in for you small businesses out there. There is another path to go, and that's via an assisted acquisition office. GSA is, in my opinion, the best one. I might be a little biased because I came from there, but there is a great program being run by GSA. If you're not familiar with them, GSA is divided into two houses. There's a real estate side and there's an acquisition side. Within the acquisition side, there's an assisted acquisition service. It's a fee for service setup for other government agencies so that they pay a fee and then GSA performs their full acquisition for them, cradle to grave. All right. Those typically take 3 to 6 months to execute for a phase three. And again, that's from receiving requirements, receiving funding, all of that from the get-go. It's a little bit faster. Part of the reason it's faster is because GSA has a 100% phase three dedicated staff on hand. I think right now it's up to 40 some odd people, maybe a little bit more since I left. I know they've hired some more folks. Of note, though, to understand how this all plays, GSA is not one of those participating agencies. They have limited authority as a non-participating agency. And what does that mean? That means that GSA cannot fund or solicit and evaluate a phase one or phase two contract. They can award a phase two contract, and they can maintain and manage a phase two contract post-award all the way to closing it out. But they can't do that upfront stuff. And the reason for that is because they're not a participating agency. They don't have SBIR funds, those mandated set aside funds in order to do that. It all ties back to the money, right? At the phase three level, though, it's not SBIR funds at all. GSA has full rights and protections, around that. So, cradle to grave from initial, requirements discussions to funding, market research, getting it through solicitation, evaluation, and then on contract and managing it post award, they're able to do fully. All right. And so it's a great option at the phase three point. So what would that look like, let's say, right? So here's sort of a flow chart. You'll see there are a lot of touch points between the mutual client, between GSA and the small business, which is whatever government activity wants to fund and procure this new innovative technology or solution throughout the entire process, through the pre-award, evaluation, post-award, all of that. And you might be thinking, you keep saying, solicitation, evaluation, all of that. I thought this was sole source. It is, but the government still has to evaluate a proposal for technical fit as well as price reasonableness. So, while you likely will get the contract, and there may be some back and forth iterations, which is great because you can do that in a sole source environment. The government still has to look at what it is that you say you're going to do on a contract and make sure that it makes sense for the scenario, and that again the price is reasonable. Okay. So again, GSA, what are the benefits? Really going with them. We talked about cradle to grave. It's a very low fee to go over there. So far, zero protest record. On billions of dollars worth of SBIRs right now. They're able to rapidly award compared to other, in-house offices. They have that dedicated staff that is light years more knowledgeable than a lot of local contracting shops because they don't live in the far world primarily. And government-wide reach, that's huge. So GSA is the prime buyer for all of the federal government. And because of that, they have the ability, in fact, they're the only agency that has the ability to award contracts on behalf of the whole government. And so, what this would mean to you as a vendor is that let's say you have a customer in the Department of Defense, and then maybe you have another use case for the same technology in the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation. GSA is able to consolidate those down. In fact, they favor that and write one contract to cover them all. All right. And with that, GSA favors, excuse me, IDIQs, multi-tenant contracts, which is what I'm talking about, or even multi-topic awarded contracts. So let's say you have multiple phase ones under different topic calls, multiple phase twos. GSA favors consolidating those down into one large contract that covers everything so that all of your different customers can access you and those different technologies, those different solutions, all in one easy process. They also specialize in high dollar value awards. So a lot of local contracting shops are not doing, 10 to $50 million SBIRs, let alone 50 to $400 million plus sole source SBIR 3 awards. GSA is doing those. So while not all of them are at that high range, in terms of 400 million or even 200 million, there are more than a few, in fact, several that are in the, I would say, 50 to $150 million range. So it's a great option if you have a lot of customers, you anticipate a lot of movement. There's a lot of demand signal from the government side, from multiple departments. GSA is a great option. They also have CSO authority, Commercial Solutions Opening, which is a non-FAR based authority. So similar to like how the Air Force, for example, oftentimes uses CSO as a solicitation process to skirt around the FAR, to issue a topic call for SBIRs and then award them sometimes even via OTs, other transaction authority agreements. GSA also has an ability to merge non-FAR acquisition authorities to, again, give flexibility to the process. All right, so a quick snapshot, like I talked about, several awards there. If you look at the bottom line, there's about $12 billion portfolio of SBIR Phase IIIs that have been developed over the past 5 years at GSA. So again, just sort of letting you know there is a good amount of activity going on there. It's the largest growing, fastest growing business line within the federal government acquisition space. So something to consider. And then also, going back to the very first slide, the SBIR program also touches on, diversity of small businesses. So the government gets credit in different ways for, how they contract and who they contract to in the small business world. And so here's a snapshot to show you that, the government is tracking a breakdown of small businesses at the phase three level and what categories are getting what. And once they see the results, they tend to raise or lower the effort and the outreach and marketing uh, for different types of qualifiers within the program itself. So if you are an 8A business, if you are an economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, for example, or veteran-owned business, do some Googling, look into the stats, around this and see where the government is looking to boost or meet their goals where they didn't maybe meet last year. And perhaps there's more of an in for you in the SBIR world, and to bring that to the attention of whatever contracting shop you're working with, because that might be attractive to them. Okay, so this is really applied to any contracting shop you're going to work with. What are they looking for at the beginning to get the conversation going and to really see that you're serious and to help them out? Some of these things, and even on the next slide when I show you some required documents, are government generated documents, meaning it's an inherently governmental function and only government can create those documents. However, you can provide inputs for them and you can do certain things to help them develop those documents so that they make sense, because they might not be the technical SMEs. Your sponsor may not even be a financial SME. So you need to help them out, and that's okay. Again, in the sole source environment, but ultimately the document is going to come from them, being finally generated. So think about your desired award date. When is it that you're looking to get on contract for a phase three? What's the latest possible award date to meet your government customers' need, right? And then you start backing up your timeline and planning. Okay, so thinking about again your desired award date, your timeline, estimated dollar value, when funding will be available, all of those things you'll get in conversation with your clients or your potential clients. Figuring out who's going to do the post award management on the client side, helping them identify a technical SME, identifying who from the corporate perspective of your company are going to be the main POCs. Does the customer, if you're looking to go the GSA route, for example, or any assisted acquisition route, does your client have the capability and approval to do that? If not, how do they get it, right? Start helping them figure that out, because they might not even know. I go back and scrub and find, the topic numbers from your previous SBIR awards, have those on hand. the number of awards you've won in the past, if it's been several of them, you want to get a handle on that if you're trying to tie in multiple topics into one contract. And then start thinking about what would work out best for you, an IDIQ contract or a standalone contract. And if it's an IDIQ, start getting together a real good estimate of the quantity and the nature of the awards. That'll help you figure out the government figure out really the right type of vehicle to put those under. Okay, so to give you sort of an inside scoop from the government's perspective, one of the first things the government has to do is figure out a way to get this thing funded, right? And so they're going to do some budget drills in the background. Once money is identified, if it's an internal activity, it could just be sending funding from one internal office to another. If it's via an assisted process to GSA, for example, it would be through an interagency agreement, which is sort of a contract between government agencies. There's two parts to that. One is like a term sheet, terms and conditions, and then a part B is the actual funding piece. So it's the terms and conditions around specifically the funding and how it can be used and what capacity. All right. There's going to be some kind of a statement that will be needed from your sponsor that says that yes, what is being proposed derives from, extends, or completes work previously done in a phase one, phase two award. And then if you're one of those companies that has procured a phase one or phase two from another small business, you're going to need some documentation that shows that you are now the successor in interest. Previously, up to a few years ago, you had to get those contracts novated, which for those who don't understand what that means, it means literally getting those old contracts rewritten so that they are now in the name of the new company. You no longer have to do that. So now you just have to show some sort of proof of sale through legal documents that you can provide to the contracting shop, and that covers it. You now have rights to a phase three. Gather up all the copies of your previous SBIR and SBIR awards to include the statements of work. Oftentimes they're an attachment, so you want to make sure that you include those when you send those to the government. And then the government will generate an IGCE. Now, you can't do that, nor should you. I mean, it's a huge violation of Procurement Integrity Act. So what you can do, though, is you can provide a ROM, a rough order of magnitude. So that's your sort of internal government or contractor estimate that you provide to the government. The government can use that as a basis to create their IGC off of, or at least a check, against what they're coming up with. In addition to that, a crosswalk document that compares or walks really the requirements from the phase one or phase two work to the proposed phase three work is extremely beneficial because it helps form that connection, that derive from extend complete connection, and further backs up the fact that you now have rights to receive the sole source award. The government will be generating a quality assurance surveillance plan, which is sort of their quality check plan, right? So you're going to have to do one too post award as well. So it works to help figure out with the government sponsor upfront how it is you're going to manage quality and what things would work out best for you in terms of checkpoints and types of deliverables that quality checks should be made on and that sort of thing. You can have influence into that. And then if you're on the Department of Defense side or any kind of national security side, intelligence community, whatever, you're going to need security access in terms of clearances, or maybe for your company headquarters. A DD 254 will be needed, and that's the security requirements documentation that authorizes you to have those clearances and do that kind of work. So that's something that often takes a while to get. And if you are looking to go into that classified realm, that's something you want to start working pretty quickly. All right, now, last thing here we'll talk about are what are common types of agreements that we'll see, and most of them are going to be contracts at this phase. You might see some agreements in the form of OTs, but mostly it'll be traditional contract style, although they'll look a little more commercial than a standard government contract. One is a standalone contract, and that's a contract that has no parent-child, contractual hierarchy at all. They're typically used in single tenant scenarios. The requirements can range in complexity. It could be for something really simple like a license or buying a widget to something more complex in terms of our advanced research and development activities, labor type stuff. It can utilize simplified acquisition procedures if the requirement is under a certain financial threshold. But ultimately, the SBA and the policy directives state that we should try to keep this generally as simple as possible anyway, and these contracts are favored to be awarded in the least complex manner to include firm fixed price and labor hour and avoid cost contracting because also a lot of small businesses don't have approved cost accounting systems. All right, another common method is IDIQs, really any indefinite delivery vehicle. And this is for, if you have the government has a recurring need, but they don't know how many they want to buy or how much they want to buy of something or when they're going to make the orders, they could set up one basic contract, like an umbrella contract that has your takeout menu on it. And then every time somebody wants to place an order against that takeout menu, another subcontract is awarded, a task order contract, or a delivery order, depending on what it actually is that is being bought. But each one of those delivery task orders, the process for that is much, much faster. So, while it might take, for example, up to 3 to 6 months to put a large umbrella IDIQ contract in place, each subsequent task or delivery order can only take a month or two, depending, right? It's a lot quicker. Um, and those are often used for well-defined multi-tenant type requirement scenarios. But again, firm fixed price labor hour is the preference for that as well. So two others that are gaining popularity, but not there yet, but they are options for you to talk about with your clients are basic ordering agreements, BOAs, similar to an IDIQ, recurring needs, but you don't really know how much or how often the purchases are going to be made. Those individual orders are not contracts until they're issued. So once they're issued, they become a legally binding contract, but the BOA itself is not a contract like the way an IDIQ is at the basic order level. They're appropriate for more simple orders, typically firm fixed price, software licenses, widgets, things of that nature. And there is a simplified ordering process in that there's a form that's already created, right? Anytime there's a template, things get a little bit easier. So there is a template for placing orders on that as opposed to an IDIQ task order. And then there's other transactions, which again is a non-FAR based process. And those will really look more like a commercial contract. And there's total flexibility in how those are issued and other different benefits to those. That's a whole other webinar. But just know that that is another way to issue a SBIR 3 contract is as an OT. And that completely, gets around FAR requirements and opens up the door to other creative acquisition types. So that's a lot of information. I gave you a ton, and I apologize for that quick little, technical screw up there. I don't know what happened. Try to figure that out for next time. But, bottom line is it's a great program, SBIR 3. If you think you're ready for it, or you think it's something you want to explore in the next year, 2 years, whatever, it's never too late to start thinking about that because the lead time it takes, in winning your other awards and getting there, and then planning that, have a conversation with us. Come to the Outpost, talk to us about the potential for your company in a phase three, and we can see what we can do to help you out in getting those requirements set, documentation that we talked about, identifying clients, and funding for that phase three since it's out of the phase one, phase two, funding realm, and any other assistance we can provide in getting you there, even if it's just educating you on the program itself further and getting into more detail than what I presented here today. Now, the Outpost, for those of you who don't know, just 2 seconds on that, a company focused on doing good first, heavily involved in the national security realm, but we do have a lot of folks on staff that are experts not only in phase one, phase two, but also phase three contracting, as I mentioned. So again, come on by, talk to the experts, email out to any one of the founding members and partners or anybody else who's an account manager, or you can email me and we can get you set up and go down that path. All right. Now I've got a few minutes, so I will go to the Q&A here and I'll answer a couple questions, but I'm going to have to, for the rest, we can email out some answers to some of these later, but we can also have separate conversations as well. So feel free to email me your question if I don't get to it here, but let's try to go through a few. This is from Adam. Can a phase one or two from one agency be turned into a phase two or three with a completely different agency? Yes, absolutely. So a phase three contract can be awarded on behalf of any agency. Phase two can as well. So let's say you want a phase one from the Air Force, you could be issued a phase two from the Army. You could be issued a phase three from GSA, on behalf of NASA, based off of those same technologies and services that you put into effect there via your previous SBIR awards. So the program is totally flexible across all those participating agencies and the assisted services in terms of acquisition. I thought SBIR did not consider women-owned or socially economically disadvantaged companies when making awards. Is an advantage to be one of these entities? Yes, while it is not a requirement to be one of these entities to get an award, and there isn't a mandated set aside for those companies, again, the government does get credit for issuing to those types of companies. So during the market research phase, there is a market research phase, even at the phase three level. We look to see where to target advertising and programming and all of that for the solicitation and eventual award for all those different phases of contracts. And they could be targeted towards women-owned small businesses. Certain forums could be used for the solicitation or whatnot. Particularly at phase three level, where you can use supplemental ways to get out information to supplement the government wide point of entry on sam.gov. So there again, the summary of that answer is no. There's no mandatory, but yes, there is an opportunity to target those communities, and certainly the government gets extra credit for awarding to those specific entities. Right. Can you please share where we can find the Phase III SBA policy regarding contract denial with bona fide need? Yes, it's if you Google the SBIR Policy Directive, May of 2023 is the latest update. You will find it, and then when you pull up the policy directive, you can do a keyword search for even if you search for max extent practicable, that phrase, you will find the section that talks about that specifically. And you can read through that, or just search for SBIR Phase III, and there aren't too many sections that touch on Phase III in the policy directive, and you'll find it within there as well. Sorry, I don't have an exact reference point right now. I'd have to go back and look for it, but that's a starting place for you. It's in there. Okay, are Phase III contracts restricted only to the government organization with whom a Phase II was done? I think we talked about that. No, it's not. Any participating agency or the assisted service can award a phase three off of any previous phase one or two from any agency. All right, so for the purposes of deriving from phase 1, 2, how is TACFI treated? So TACFI and STRATFI are really, phase 2Bs, really. I mean, it really all falls down to it's a sequential phase two, right? So it carries all rights afforded a phase two contract, and that's really how they're treated. And, an active TACFI contract is really an active phase two contract, and it carries all those rights with it, and you can get a phase three awarded off of that as well. There are other things in terms of when we get into TACFI, STRATFI, like matching funds, and matching funds being put on a phase three. That is something that's possible that can count as government matching funds if you have an active phase three at the same time. That's a whole nother topic, but just know at the TACFI, STRATFI level, yes, all rights, for the SBIR phase two level carry over, and there are other interesting things that can be done for a phase three contract at that point. The slide says GSA, quote, can rapidly award and administer phase 1, 2, 3. Would this count as the customer for the AFWERX SBIRs, meaning if you have a solid user in TPOC, GSA can handle the contract A to Z? Again, for phase 1 and 2s, yes, GSA can award the contract and administer it to the end. For phase 3s, yeah, if you have a sponsor identified with the money, with the requirement, you can go to GSA, you can have them, look over everything, and if they take it on as a project, they will manage the whole thing from the initial requirement scrub, market research, getting the funding over, through solicitation, proposal, evaluation, award, and management for the next 5+ years. Okay. Thank you, Gary, for is there a relationship between phase 3 and a TACFI, STRATFI if at the very one inaugural phase 3 contract? For example, can a phase 3 be converted to a TACFI, STRATFI? No. Specifically that question, no. I believe I touched on the relationship there already with TACFI, STRATFI. That's phase 2 level. Phase 3 can be awarded off of any phase 2 or 1 activity. So that's your relationship right there. All right. I've heard IDIQ can be challenging because small business must be able to meet the need, which is not specified. Is this correct? Yeah, so during the market research phase of a phase three, the government will ascertain the viability of the company, right? And part of that, sort of a due diligence scrub, and part of it will be to have conversations and look into financials and things like that and see if you have the capability to meet the need. If you don't have the capability to meet the need, one option is to look at a reduced need, right? So start out with a smaller phase three contract and then look to scale that up as you scale. If you get to a sticking point where the government's demand is much higher than what you can do, that's where teaming, partnerships, subcontracting, and then maybe even looking into selling off the phase one, two, and then you become the sub on it falls into play. Okay. By need, I mean quantity. Okay, I think that next one's the same contract or same question. Try to get through as many as I can. Does IDIQ contract require the full funding commitment from the government? No. So at the IDIQ base contract level, what'll happen is one of two things. Either the initial funding requirement by law will be met by the award of the initial task or delivery order as well. That'll happen pretty quickly within a week after the award of the IDIQ base contract itself. And if not, then there will be a minimum guarantee, put onto that base contract, maybe $1,000 or maybe even up to $5,000, something like that, that will be billed against that first task or delivery order once that initial order is made. That's how that works. And then, incremental funding certainly can be in play for even any given task or delivery order. In fact, the SBA and policy directive really pushes for incremental funding, maybe even upfront funding. If nothing else, setting up deliverables on a regular schedule, whether it's like even a monthly status report delivered monthly that you can tie a payment to regular recurring payment, because the SBA and the government understands you're a small business and you need the working capital. So, there's flexibility in the program to allow for that. Is TAC treated as phase two? Yes. Next question. Any update on the GSA Phase III Rio? Rio is on permanent hold right now. I have no further information at this time. If we have a BAA contract coming, or sorry, how are phase threes funded during a CR, or are they? That's a great question. It depends on the particular agency that's funding it. So if it's counted as a new start contract, often new starts are not funded until CR is done and steady flow of funding is available past the same funding that was allocated next year, plus or minus 20%. Um, so, typically I would say you're not going to see a lot of brand new phase threes being awarded in Q1 of the government FY. So that would be like right now. You'll still start seeing an uptick in awards, in February, March timeframe once funds, typically get released more fully. And then there's pressure to, commit and obligate and expend those funds, throughout the remainder of the last 2.5 quarters of the year. If we have a BAA contract the decks from previous silver effort, what should we make sure is in our BAA contract? Not quite sure on that one. Why don't you email me on that one and we can get into that one. Okay, is it necessary to get a phase two before getting a phase three? No, you can go from phase one to phase three as well. So let's say you're phase one, you already have a prototype, you write a white paper, you say we've already got an MVP, it's already been tested out, and the government's willing to go phase three from a phase one. Totally doable. You can do it. Okay, can a phase three also request and pay for security clearances? I mean, there's no payment piece to that. I mean, the government. I mean, whatever structural changes you might need to put a skiff in, or for example, in your space. I mean, that's going to be on your dime. The government's not going to pay you on the phase three to build a skiff, that type of thing. In terms of logistics for your personnel, all of that kind of stuff, yeah, that's going to be taken out of overhead. But on the government side, the government will obviously pay for all of its own costs, which are the vast majority of the costs related to security requirements, regardless of what the rumor that goes around that vendors actually pay the most for clearances is not true. The government does most of the actual payment through your taxpayer dollars in establishing your clearances. Can GSA help find the government sponsor? Potentially. I mean, they have a large network now that they've done billions of dollars worth of government SBIRs. They understand, a lot of different client areas and verticals, and that ecosystem is building. So yes, they might be able to help you out. They're not going to do your business development for you. So you're going to definitely going to need to do a lot more digging in terms of finding funds. I would argue even more so than at phase one, phase two level. Um, so it is worth it to either have that capability in-house or contract out for it to help you out there. Okay, what if you received a phase one an award, but you can't complete phase two? I guess that's a loaded question. Depends what you mean by that. Is that funding ran out and you didn't get to the full prototype or whatever in the funding scenario? I mean, you could still get a phase three off of it. You completed research up to a certain point, and that research can continue in a phase three. Let's say in that scenario, if you defaulted on it, like your company imploded, and but you somehow transfer the rights to a new company you stood up, um, I guess in theory, same situation. You could still get a phase three off of it, but the government would probably be looking at as the performance was lacking on that phase two. So another phase two may be necessary. Again, that's scenario specific. So if you'd like to email me the details on that, we could delve into that deeper. If the agency interested in acquiring sole source via phase three does that mean the GSA matches funding one to one? No, GSA does not provide any funding. In fact, that agency will have to provide a small fee, typically in the 3.5% range, to GSA to perform that. GSA is also a non-appropriated agency on the assisted acquisition piece. So, that money goes over to fund the bodies that are going to do all of that work over the next 5, 6 years. Can you flip a sitter phase one to a phase three SIBR? Yes, you can. Skipping phase two to build off the prior question. Yes, the answer is yes, you absolutely can. You can go phase one to phase three, phase one, two to phase three, phase two direct to phase three, and it can be sitter to SIBR. Like I said at the very beginning, SIBR three is all there is. There isn't a sitter three, all right? But there's a SIBR and sitter one and two. And either one of those, it can mix and match, and they can go over to phase three as long as certain requirements are met along the way. That was rapid. It was kind of fun. All right, that's it. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Again, if you have any follow-up questions or you want to reach out and talk to anybody, email the Outpost, email myself. And I wish you all a happy holidays. Take some time away from this crazy startup life and go enjoy the family. All right, take care, everybody. See you next time.